Hello, you're watching Daybreak on A News. I'm Bakhtiar Sanov, and let's take a look at the top stories shaping today's global agenda. US President Donald Trump says the Iran war could end soon as Tehran and Muscat near a Strait of Hormuz shipping deal. Houthi strikes kill dozens in Yemen as Saudi Arabia warns of further attacks. And at least 100 people have died in mass migrant crossings into Spain's Ceuta enclave, where thousands remain stranded. First this morning, President Donald Trump says the war with Iran could end soon as negotiations over the Strait of Hormuz continue. His comments come as Iran and Oman move closer to a new shipping arrangement for the strait. All the commercial traffic is still heavily restricted.
US President Donald Trump says he believes the conflict with Iran could end soon as negotiations over the Strait of Hormuz are showing signs of progress. Speaking at the White House, Trump did not confirm that a deal had been reached, but said talks were moving in a positive direction.
But I think we're doing very well. I'm involved in the negotiation. I think we're doing fine. It could be soon, yeah.
Despite diplomatic efforts, shipping through the Strait of Hormuz remains heavily restricted. Only a limited number of commercial vessels are crossing the waterway each day. Iranian state media reports that Tehran and Oman are close to agreeing on a new framework to manage maritime traffic through the strait. Under the proposed arrangement, vessels entering the Gulf would pass through Iranian waters, while ships leaving would use routes that are closer to Oman. Iran describes the plan as a new regional security model rather than a full return to previous navigation arrangements. The agreement still requires approval from Iran's Supreme National Security Council before it can be formally announced. The Strait of Hormuz normally handles about 1/5 of the world's oil and liquefied natural gas supplies, making any deal to restore commercial shipping closely watched by international markets.
Iran's parliament is reviewing a draft bill that would ban US and Israeli vessels from passing through the Strait of Hormuz. It would also impose fines on ships violating the proposed rules. Under the proposal, military and civilian cargo linked to Israel would also be blocked, as Tehran seeks to strengthen control over the strait. Lawmakers are reviewing the bill and consulting experts before they make a final decision. Meanwhile, the uncertainty over the Strait of Hormuz has pushed oil prices higher. Brent crude has climbed above $83 a barrel, and US crude also rose. And the diplomatic push over Strait of Hormuz is widening. Iran and Italy have exchanged updates on negotiations over the strait. Tehran says whilst an agreement with Oman is close, the waterway will not reopen immediately. Turaj Shirelilo reports the latest from Tehran.
Iran and Italy have briefed each other about the latest negotiations between Tehran and Muscat on the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, as well as talks in Rome about Lebanon and Israel for a comprehensive ceasefire agreement, according to the state IRNA news agency. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi and his Italian counterpart Antonio Tajani spoke to each other on phone on Wednesday. A foreign ministry press release said that the two top diplomats said they supported diplomatic efforts to reduce tensions. Meantime, Deputy Foreign Minister for Legal Affairs Kazem Gharibabadi said that Iran and Oman are near to finalizing a deal on new shipping arrangements at the Strait of Hormuz. However, he stressed that the agreement would not lead to an immediate or complete reopening of the strategic waterway connecting the Persian Gulf and the Sea of Oman. He added, the understanding with Oman does not mean implementing Clause 5 of the Islamabad Memorandum of Understanding between Iran and the United States. Also, in another related development, a spokesman for the National Security and Foreign Policy Commission of the Parliament, Hassan Qashqavi, stressed that the situation in the strait will not return to pre-war conditions. The lawmaker was quoted by the Parliament news agency as saying that Iran will not accept the US-imposed Southern Corridor because it fails to ensure Iran's national interests. Amid renewed hopes of de-escalation, Foreign Ministry spokesman Ismail Baqai said that neither Foreign Minister Araqchi nor Parliamentary Speaker Mohammad Baqir Ghalibaf are scheduled to visit Pakistan or Qatar for mediated talks with the US. Turaj Shiralilu from Tehran for A News.
Yemen's Houthi movement says it has launched fresh attacks against Saudi-linked targets, claiming missile strikes on an oil tanker in the Gulf of Aden and military positions in eastern Yemen.
The Houthis say they carried out a series of attacks against Saudi-linked targets on Wednesday and Thursday, as tensions with Saudi Arabia continue to rise. The group claimed it struck the Saudi oil tanker Daisy with a ballistic missile in the Gulf of Aden, forcing the vessel to turn back. Hours earlier, it had also reported targeting another Saudi tanker in the northern Red Sea, saying the attacks were part of what it calls a maritime blockade against Saudi Arabia.
Our armed forces carried out a broad and qualitative military operation targeting the Saudi enemy's mobilizations in the areas of Al-Ruwayk, Al-Aba and Al-Thanaya, as well as other camps belonging to the so-called 1st and 3rd emergency regiments, using a large number of ballistic missiles and drones. The results of the operation were as follows: killing and injuring of hundreds of the Saudi enemy's mercenaries, the destroying and burning a large number of the Saudi enemy's camps, mobilizations, warehouses and weapons in the Al-Wadiya area in the eastern part of the country, and destroying a large number of military vehicles present in the targeted camps.
Yemeni government sources, however, said at least 30 government troops were killed in attacks on military camps in Marib and Hadramaut provinces, warning the death toll could rise. The latest developments come after the Houthis announced a maritime ban on Saudi-linked shipping last month, accusing Riyadh of maintaining a blockade on Houthi-controlled areas. Yemen has remained divided by conflict since 2014, when the Houthis seized the capital, Sana'a, prompting a Saudi-led military intervention the following year.
And now we have a short break. Right after the break, we'll discuss the rest of the global stories. Welcome back. You're watching Daybreak. Now let's have a look at those global stories. Ukraine says it has intensified its long-range attacks on Russian military and energy infrastructure. President Volodymyr Zelensky is also pushing to fast-track the development of Ukraine's own advanced missile defense capabilities. Here is the latest.
Ukraine says it has carried out long-range strikes on 2 Russian oil refineries, as well as targeting patrol boats and other vessels in the Black Sea. In a post on Telegram, President Volodymyr Zelensky said Ukrainian forces struck the Bashneft Novoil refinery in Bashkortostan. He says they also struck the Slavneft Yanos refinery in Russia's Yaroslavl region. The regional governor said emergency crews extinguished a major fire at the refinery following what he described as the largest Ukrainian drone attack on the region. He said Russian air defenses shot down 93 drones. He also said 4 people suffered shrapnel injuries, but there were no fatalities. The Yaroslavl refinery, which has been targeted before, processes around 15 million tons of oil a year. The latest exchanges have also drawn international concern. United Nations Secretary-General Antonio Guterres has strongly condemned the recent wave of large-scale missile and drone attacks by both Russia and Ukraine, according to a UN spokesperson.
The Secretary-General is deeply concerned by the continued escalation of the conflict, including onto the territory of the Russian Federation. In this regard, he also condemns the recent Ukrainian drone attacks on several regions of the Russian Federation, which reportedly resulted in civilian casualties and damage to civilian infrastructure.
Meanwhile, President Zelensky says Ukraine is stepping up efforts to develop its own advanced missile defense capabilities. He says he has met senior officials to speed up weapons development, with the aim of delivering tangible results by the end of the year. He also says Ukraine wants to accelerate work on both an anti-ballistic missile defense system and domestically produced ballistic missiles.
Only a tiny minority of countries worldwide have developed an anti-ballistic project of this kind for themselves. Ukraine must join this group of nations. We are creating all the necessary conditions to make that happen. Others spent decades developing their systems. Ukraine must do this as quickly as possible, with concrete results already in place by the turn of 2026 to 2027. Ukraine is also working to develop ballistic missiles of its own. The tests have shown strong potential. We need to turn this into a real weapon.
Zelensky also referred to Ukraine's participation in the Freya program, a joint European project to develop an anti-ballistic missile defense system as an alternative to the Patriot system used by the United States.
As autumn approaches, Ukraine is calling on allies to bolster its air defenses. Kiev says critical Western supplies, which are needed to protect the national energy grid, are facing severe delays. William Denslow reports from Brussels.
According to Ukrainian officials, Kyiv was targeted by Russian attacks on average every 3 days last month. And the country's President Volodymyr Zelensky has issued a stark warning that Russia is bolstering its missile production ahead of a likely winter campaign to again target Ukraine's energy infrastructure. That is why he says that urgent action is needed from Kyiv's allies, especially amidst this warning from Ukraine that the supply of air defense missiles to counter the threat from ballistic missiles from allies is down by a third in the first half of 2026 compared to last year. In particular, Ukraine needs Patriot defense systems. Now, these are the ones that Ukraine says are best equipped to help counter Russian strikes. However, they are a precious commodity and particularly under strain, considering they are also being used as part of the US-Israel conflict with Iran. Now, assistance is on the way. Here in Europe, a production facility for Patriots is in production in Germany. The European Union also saying that it has this loan of over $100 billion for Ukraine, and it's in constant contact with Kyiv to ensure that it gets the supplies as part of this transfer of cash it needs to help protect itself in any way it sees fit. Also, the United States, crucially, at the Ankara NATO summit in July, President Trump said that Ukraine could have the right to be able to make its own Patriot missiles going forward. He has seemingly, though, walked that back, saying that no final decision has been made. If it is made, it would be a huge boon for Kyiv, and with these supplies from Europe as well, very welcome news indeed. But all of these pledges could indeed take months to fully come to fruition. What Kyiv is saying is that urgent action is needed now to help it protect its skies. William Denslow, Frey News, Brussels.
Britain has unveiled another round of sanctions against Russia. It's targeting banks, ships and companies it says help sustain Moscow's war effort in Ukraine. Britain says the move is aimed at increasing pressure on Moscow and limiting revenues that could support its war in Ukraine. A news correspondent Zeina Parizadeh has more from UK.
The UK has announced a new package of sanctions targeting Russian ships, banks and industrial companies in its latest effort to disrupt revenues that the government says could help fund Moscow's war against Ukraine. The government says it is introducing 13 new designations and 6 new specifications under its Russia sanctions laws. The measures include sanctions against 6 Russian banks, 6 newly acquired Shadow Fleet tankers, and 4 Russian companies involved in importing tantalum and rubium, rare metals used in battlefield weapons. The latest sanctions are part of Britain's wider efforts to increase economic pressure on Moscow, following Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022. The UK government says the measures are designed to target parts of Russia's economy, as well as companies involved in supplying materials linked to military production. Since Russia launched its full-scale invasion, Britain says it has sanctioned more than 3,400 individuals, organizations and ships under its Russia sanctions regime. Foreign Secretary Ed Miliband said Britain would continue to increase pressure on Russia until what he described as a just and lasting peace has been reached. The announcement comes as Western countries continue using sanctions as part of their response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. However, Moscow has repeatedly rejected Western sanctions, describing them as politically motivated and arguing they have failed to change Russia's position. Zeynep Ferizadeh, A News, Manchester, United Kingdom.
Hungary's energy system is facing growing pressure as record low water levels on the Danube disrupt operations at the country's only nuclear power plant. Experts now warn that similar events could become more frequent as Europe experiences more extreme weather.
Exceptionally low water levels on the Danube have forced Hungary to sharply reduce output at its only nuclear power plant, which relies on the river for cooling. The facility, which supplies much of the country's electricity, is expected to operate at just over 10% of its capacity for weeks, depending on river conditions. Experts warn the disruption may not be a one-off, with low river levels likely to pose a recurring challenge for Hungary's energy system.
There is a probability that similar events will happen in the future. However, this probability is not 100%. The power plant is prepared for different scenarios. It is clear that with this very low water level, the operation was limited. And I think there is a possibility to intervene into the Danube River in short term to increase the water level a bit to ensure the operation of the existing reactors. And for a bit longer term, we have to reconsider the cooling method of the new installation Pash 2 because this extraordinary event can happen more frequently if we consider a longer time frame.
The professor also said future nuclear projects, including Hungary's planned PAX 2 plant, should consider alternative cooling methods as extreme weather becomes more common. Hungary has introduced energy-saving measures, including switching off decorative lighting at government buildings and landmarks. Europe has experienced record-breaking heat waves and widespread wildfires this summer, with scientists warning that rising temperatures are placing increasing pressure on critical infrastructure, including energy systems.
Officials say the Spanish enclave of Ceuta is facing a humanitarian emergency following last week's deadly migrant surge. At least 100 people died during last week's mass border rush, according to the city's leader Juan Jesus Vivas. Around 72,000 migrants entered last week, but between 3,000 and 5,000 remain in Ceuta. Vivas said reception centers for adult and minor migrants had been overwhelmed and reached a state of collapse. Meanwhile, EU Migration Commissioner Magnus Brenner said the events in Ceuta has shaken the politics of an entire continent. Morocco has said it's ready to work with Spain and other European partners to identify and return unaccompanied minors who crossed into the Spanish enclave of Ceuta. State media reports say the move follows instructions to Morocco's Interior and Foreign Affairs ministers. Local authorities estimate around 1,100 unaccompanied minors remain in Ceuta and cannot be immediately deported under current procedures. Aid group CR has urged authorities to protect the children's rights, including family reunification where appropriate. As governments around the world move to strengthen protections for children online, a landmark court ruling in the US is the latest in a global effort to hold technology firms accountable.
A court in the U.S. state of New Mexico has ordered Meta to pay $567 million in a ruling that holds the company responsible for what it said was harm to children's mental health. The presiding judge said Meta created a public nuisance among youth in the state with a design that encourages addictive use among children. She also said the company failed to adequately protect minors from sexual exploitation. Under a 5-year court order, Meta must introduce a broad range of youth safety measures for users in New Mexico. That includes monthly limits on teenagers' use of Facebook and Instagram, restrictions on notifications designed to drive engagement, and tighter controls on contact between adults and minors. It also includes additional safeguards for AI-powered chatbots and enhanced review procedures for reports involving child sexual abuse. Meta has said it will appeal the ruling, arguing it has invested heavily in protecting teenagers online and removing harmful content. Many countries have instituted or proposed social media restrictions for children under 16. They have raised concerns over mental health, online safety, cyberbullying, addictive platform design, and exposure to harmful content. Policies from countries in the European Union, Australia, and Azerbaijan reflect a broader global push to hold technology companies more accountable for protecting young users online.
U.S. President Donald Trump's Board of Peace has issued its first construction contract for Gaza, a project to build a small military outpost for Moroccan troops, according to reports. The planned facility would house around 150 personnel as part of an international stabilization force expected to support security arrangements in the territory. The contract has not yet been finalized and is expected to be one of several projects linked to Trump's Gaza reconstruction plans. The move comes as much of Gaza remains heavily damaged following the war, with millions of residents still facing severe humanitarian challenges. U.S.-mediated negotiations between Lebanon and Israel have wrapped up in Rome with some progress, but no agreement on the main territorial dispute. The latest round also laid the groundwork for further talks next month.
3 days of negotiations between Israel and Lebanon produced agreements on prisoner procedures and future security arrangements, but failed to break the deadlock over disputed border areas. The latest round of talks covered military, political, legal and border issues, along with the question of prisoners. Negotiators were unable to agree on expanding the proposed areas for a phased Israeli withdrawal along the border. Lebanon wants an additional area included, while Israel said verification measures in the first 2 areas should be completed before any expansion. Despite the impasse, the sides exchanged preliminary lists of detained and missing people. Lebanon submitted a list of its citizens who are detained or unaccounted for, saying the release of civilian detainees should come first. Israel provided a list of Lebanese Jews who are missing or believed to have been killed in Lebanon. Sources said the parties also agreed on potential future monitoring arrangements and to pursue a new UN Security Council resolution that would provide the international framework for security arrangements following the mandate of the UN interim force in Lebanon. US officials have reportedly committed to continuing engagement with both sides on detainees and border demarcation ahead of the next round of negotiations. For now, they are tentatively scheduled for September 1st. Meanwhile, the United Nations said it recorded the sharpest escalation in Israeli military activity since late June, with 120 projectiles fired by Israel by late afternoon on Thursday. UN peacekeepers also reported airstrikes and dozens of Israeli airspace violations, saying they were using liaison channels with both militaries to help ease tensions and support the existing ceasefire.
The June framework envisaged the Israeli forces withdrawing from designated pilot zones while the Lebanese army takes control and Hezbollah is disarmed. But with violence returning and Hezbollah rejecting the deal, the path toward a lasting settlement remains highly uncertain. Joining us from Jerusalem is Maurice Hirsch, a researcher at the Jerusalem Center for Security and Foreign Affairs. Mr. Hirsch, thank you very much for taking time to join us on the program.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Good morning. Mr. Hirsch, let me begin with the latest escalation. What is driving Israel's renewed strikes in southern Lebanon, and what does this tell us about the current state of the ceasefire?
I think what's driving all of the violence in Lebanon is Iran trying to destabilize the region using its proxies, using Hezbollah's refusal to disarm despite agreements, despite commitments, and really the impotence of the Lebanese government to actively and effectively take control of Lebanese territory from this destructive terrorist organization.
So Israel says its military actions are linked to Hezbollah activity, while residents in southern Lebanon say they are once again paying the price. How does Israel assess the security situation on the ground right now?
Well, so we still understand that Hezbollah is active and operating all through Lebanon, including in areas of southern Lebanon. We just, the IDF just recently exposed thousands of sites all over southern Lebanon where Hezbollah had dug its terror infrastructure. And all of those sites are now being exposed, uncovered, and destroyed. And unfortunately, Hezbollah and Iran are continuing to endanger the Lebanese population, continuing to fight this war against Israel. Israel has no really beef with Lebanon whatsoever. We would very much prefer that Lebanon be part of the peace agreements, the Abraham Accords. And the problem is Iran and Hezbollah that are determined to destroy Israel, undermine Lebanon, and really cause death and destruction for the Lebanese people.
Mr. Hirsch, the latest evacuation order for Al Mansouri has raised fears among residents that a broader displacement campaign could return. Should we expect more evacuation orders and expanded Israeli military operations in southern Lebanon?
I think what we're seeing is a direct response to the aggression shown by Hezbollah the last few weeks. These are attacks that cannot be tolerated and will not be tolerated by Israel. I don't think we're about to see an expanding of the operations in Lebanon on the assumption that Hezbollah understands and Iran understands that the response will be overwhelming and will target all of the military targets that are still left in Lebanon. And hopefully that will be a sufficient deterrent to invoke and really to invoke that deterrence, which is so critical, and really push the Lebanese government as well into doing what it's meant to be doing, which is to disarm Hezbollah.
So, in your view, how realistic is the pilot zone concept? Can the Lebanese army actually take effective control of these areas while simultaneously preventing Hezbollah from maintaining a military presence?
Without question, if the Lebanese army wanted to do so, it could take these areas with or without the support of the IDF and ensure that Hezbollah is not active and is not operating in those areas. Unfortunately, what we're seeing is a lack of the sufficient drive by the Lebanese government to ensure that the Lebanese army does its work. This is part of that dual game that the Lebanese government has been playing. On the one hand, talks in Rome, and on the other hand, turning a blind eye and not enforcing the ban on Hezbollah's presence in southern Lebanon, and not acting to disarm Hezbollah, which is to the detriment of Lebanon.
So as we know, Hezbollah has rejected the framework and is not participating directly in the negotiations. Can any agreement between Israel and the Lebanese government ultimately succeed without Hezbollah's direct involvement?
One would hope so. One would hope that the Lebanese government that is meant to be the spokesman for the state of Lebanon, not a terrorist organization run and operated by a foreign country, by Iran, to undermine the entire regional stability. One would hope that the Lebanese government, with the support it's been given, would be able to effectively combat and disarm Hezbollah, if only for the reason that they understand that Hezbollah is causing irreparable damage to Lebanon and will continue to cause irreparable damage to Lebanon as long as it continues to serve the Iranian mullahs rather than the Lebanese people.
Mr. Hirsch, the United States has been heavily involved in trying to broker the framework and facilitate the talks. How much leverage does Washington actually have over Israel and Lebanon, and what more could the United States do to prevent the situation from deteriorating?
Well, I don't think that the United States necessarily needs leverage over Israel. Israel has shown time and time again that we are stretching out our hand in peace to the Lebanese. We are not at war with Lebanon. We do not want to be at war with Lebanon. What leverage has to be used on the Lebanese government against Hezbollah, against Iran, in order to bring about that regional stability and in order to bring about an end to this conflict. We are not fighting the Lebanese people. We are fighting Hezbollah. We are fighting this terrorist proxy of the Iranian mullahs, not the Lebanese people. We have no fight with the Lebanese people. We would like to be able to enjoy peaceful relations with our northern neighbors as with any other country. And unfortunately, the undermining factor is Iran.
So from Israel's perspective, what would a genuinely durable security arrangement in southern Lebanon look like? Would Israel accept a full withdrawal if it received credible guarantees that Hezbollah could not rebuild its military infrastructure near the border?
I think if there is really an effective situation in which Hezbollah is disarmed, dismantled, and cannot return to any part of Lebanon, including obviously, but most importantly, southern Lebanon, then that could pave the way to both really a much wider peace deal and a retreat of the Israeli forces. The Israeli forces are in Lebanon for one purpose and one purpose alone: to ensure the safety of Israel, to ensure the safety of Israel's northern border and our hundreds of thousands of citizens who live on that northern border and whose lives have been entirely destroyed since October 8, 2023, when Hezbollah joined the genocidal call of Hamas to murder Israelis. That's unfortunately the situation, and that is why we are there. We do not want to be there. We have no interest in being in southern Lebanon, but we must defend our citizens.
Maurice Hirsch, a researcher at the Jerusalem Center for Security and Foreign Affairs, joining us from Jerusalem. Thank you very much for your time and for sharing your analysis with us. We greatly appreciate it.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. Now to a quick break. When we return, we'll discuss the key regional headlines. Welcome back, and thank you for joining me this morning. Let's return to the region now. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan is in Saudi Arabia for talks with the Saudi Crown Prince and Pakistan's Prime Minister. According to regional sources, Turkey, Saudi Arabia and Pakistan are expected to sign a joint defense agreement on Friday. Erdogan is due to meet Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman and Pakistani Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif. During the one-day visit, Pakistan says Sharif's meetings will also focus on bilateral relations, as well as regional and international developments of mutual interest. Turkey and Syria are seeking to deepen bilateral ties. Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan met his Syrian counterpart in Ankara for talks covering a range of regional issues. Adam Marrow reports from Istanbul.
Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan has held talks in Ankara with his Syrian counterpart, Assad Hassan el-Shaybani, as the two countries continue efforts to strengthen ties after last year's political transition in Damascus. According to Turkish officials, the two ministers discussed bilateral ties, regional security, developments in Syria, cooperation in the counterterrorism field, and efforts to stabilize the country. Talks also focused on Syria's territorial integrity, post-conflict reconstruction, humanitarian assistance, and the country's gradual reintegration into the regional and international community. The two top diplomats also exchanged views on recent developments across the Middle East and discussed possible steps to deepen cooperation between Ankara and Damascus. Security, however, remains at the heart of the relationship. Turkey insists on the full integration of armed groups into Syria's state institutions, saying Kurdish-led militant groups like the YPG should not maintain autonomous armed formations in northern Syria. Ankara regards the YPG as an extension of the outlawed PKK, which has long been viewed as a terrorist group by Turkey, the United States, and the European Union. The meeting comes as Turkey continues to support Syria's new government, both politically and economically, following the collapse of the government of Bashar al-Assad more than a year ago. After years of backing Syria's armed opposition during a devastating civil war, Ankara has repeatedly rebuilt official ties with the new leadership in Damascus. Turkish officials have repeatedly said that a stable and unified Syria is essential, both for regional security and for the voluntary return of millions of Syrian refugees still living in Turkey. Thursday's meeting underscores Ankara's role as one of Syria's key regional partners as the country seeks to restore stability after more than a decade of conflict. This is Adam Morrow for A News in Istanbul, Turkey.
So what does this closer partnership mean for Syria's future and regional security? Joining us from Ankara is Melih Demirtaş, political analyst and former diplomat. Mr. Demirtaş, welcome to A News. It's a pleasure to have you with us.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Asana, for having me.
Mr. Demirtaş, let me start with the high-level Strategic Cooperation Council. How significant is this decision, and does it signal that Turkey-Syria relations are moving from ad hoc coordination toward a more institutional and long-term strategic partnership?
Thank you. Thank you again, Mr. Asano. And yes, actually, you mentioned in a right way, because in a much more institutionalized way, much more professional way, we can say that we had an important, of course, now axis of partnership, axis of maybe regional balance between this important neighbor, as our foreign minister said that the longest border maybe between ourselves, I mean, about 900 kilometers. It is an important maybe sense of talking for many issues, starting from, of course, human contact, starting from political and economic, also social relations, but of course for some security challenges. You know that during the Assad regime for tens of years, Syria really means a lot for many countries. First of all, it means some challenge. Of course, as well, it means some center of some groups, which can be called some important terror groups. Also directly threaten Turkey's, of course, unity, Turkey's, of course, communitarian sense of, peaceful atmosphere. And now, especially in these days, where Turkey is also talking much more about this National Solidarity Act, National Solidarity Act against all kinds of terrorism. First of all, the PKK, of course, terror group. And of course, where this Syria also struggles to be much more in a unitarian sense, because in these last 2 years, we see that Syria made an important progress. Like the Foreign Minister, Mr. Shaybani, also talked yesterday with the counterpart Foreign Minister Fidan. He also mentioned and underlined that Syria has also struggled to be much more prosperous and peaceful country. And between these two important neighbors, I mean, Turkey and Syria, we will see much more enhanced dialogue, as you said, much more institutional dialogue and strategic dialogue, first of all, against some actors who really pushes the border to be much more, unilateral, or also threat to the maybe diplomatic atmosphere, like first of all Israel.
Mr. Demirtaş, Hakan Fidan said that any threat to Syria is a threat to Turkey. How should we interpret this statement? Is Ankara effectively signaling that it sees Syria's security as directly linked to Turkey's own national security?
First of all, yes, we must always think about this social and historical communitarian linkages, Mr. Hasanov, because we see in all the maybe long history, these two communities, I mean, both Turkish and Syrian communities cannot be separated between each other so easily. Yes, we have an important now line of this national states, national unity. It's an important concept starting from this 19th, 18th centuries. But that doesn't mean that the societies and communities can be really separated between each other so easily, as some nation states always want to see in the field. Some important names like Mr. Tom Barak, I mean, this United States ambassador also said this in its own way. Maybe it also seems to be some threatening to ideology of this nation states ideology, but it doesn't mean that we can see that these two communities, I mean, Turkish and Syrian communities cannot be so separated between each other. So, first of all, against the threats again of the separatist groups, against the terror groups, who really want to shape the atmosphere or the baggage, I mean, of this history according to their interest, and also against some, actors like first of all, as I said, Israel, who really can use these, groups according to its own unilateral interests for years. We also see that this intelligence operations in our field, in Turkey, in Syria, and still we see this in southern Syria, how Israel can be a damaging actor in this country. And so against this all, Turkey is really right that to push, Syria much more in prosperous, in peaceful atmosphere. And so we have seen a much more maybe strategic and intelligence linkage also with this country.
So Turkey has long viewed the SDF and YPG through the lens of its own security concerns. Could Ankara's influence over Damascus become decisive in determining whether the SDF integration process succeeds peacefully, or could pressure from Turkey actually make negotiations more difficult?
With this same historical or societal reasons, Mr. Asad, we must also be careful. We know that the communities cannot be always understood, or they cannot be always arranged or organized with some political motifs, with some predetermined maybe political agendas. Communities have some souls. Communities also have some, of course, psychological background. We know that. That doesn't mean that we also can push this old communities, these innocent feelings of some members of these communities to some terror groups. Also, they use these feelings, these innocent feelings very well, very skillfully against this Turkish unity, against Syrian unity. We know also now that Syrian civil war is an important, still a threshold also for the balance of the security in the region. But also we can see that, as you said, these groups, I can say this PKK, first of all, for tens of years, all of these, also the important names, they also maybe confess that they are used as some apparatus of this Cold War ideology. Soviet Union, United States, some European, of course, countries, they all used some groups in this Cold War ideology against their, of course, the unity of some states, first of all, Turkey, I can say. But now, starting from this maybe new regional politics, we have seen that this groups, PKK, SDF, and all other groups, we can say maybe much more Islamist, leftist, they also know that they have a limit now, and they must really confess that they must be part of this unity of some countries. I think, and Syria, also Shaybani, foreign minister, also said this, and we can see we will maybe help and we will be supported in our maybe new legislation, as you know, in this, especially nowadays in Turkey, it's this highly discussed, this National Solidarity Act, and I think we will be supported and we will be also helped also by our Syrian maybe partners, and also this was one of the main topics yesterday with the foreign ministers.
Mr. Demirtas, you have served as a diplomat, so let me ask you about the diplomatic dimension. Turkey and Syria are now discussing not only security but also economic cooperation, reconstruction and also investment. Could economic interdependence become an important tool for establishing the political relationship?
This is a good question also for diplomacy, for political science, for all social sciences, Mr. Asonov, because they can say that the people's really always seeking for much more prosperity. For their, of course, current generations, for the future generations, prosperity is a tool. Economic prosperity is an important dimension of this question maybe. And as we have seen, just this tensive atmosphere, just very high tensions due to the Russia-Ukrainian war, due to the Iranian war, the Palestinian genocide, and of course the Lebanon and the other cases in the Middle East starting to, of course, a problem for many actors. Israel or United States, much more, I think, can say, supported by this Western hemisphere, was this Western maybe, as you said, this economic interdependence. But for our side, for the Turkish, Iranian, even for Azerbaijan and some other countries, much more in this quote-unquote Eastern hemisphere, we must also talk about new projects. And yes, to your maybe answer to your question, this was also one of the important topics between, I think, Syria, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, of course, Turkey. These are important countries for this regional, especially interdependence and regional projects. And for the political positive atmosphere, we must also talk about this economic interdependence. And I think, especially with this new atmosphere, which can be also not so positive for Israel as for unilateral actors, some interdependence and some positive diplomacy can be on the table. And I think both Syrian and Turkish foreign ministers also talk this, and we'll talk more in this high-level council for the coming day.
Melih Demirtas, a political analyst and former diplomat, joining us from Ankara. Thank you very much for your time and for sharing your analysis with us. It was a pleasure having you on iNews.
Thank you.
Thank you. 2 people have been killed and 13 others injured after an explosive device detonated aboard a passenger minibus in the Damascus suburb of Jarwamana. Syrian state media said the blast occurred on Thursday, but authorities have not yet confirmed the cause of the explosion. And no group has claimed responsibility. According to Syria's health ministry, emergency teams transported the injured to nearby hospitals, while forensic investigators remain at the scene to examine the damaged vehicle. The explosion comes shortly after local community leaders in the multi-ethnic city of Jarwamana reaffirmed Syria's unity and rejected calls that they said could undermine civil peace. Italy is reportedly considering Armenia as one of several possible partner countries for migration reception or repatriation centers outside the European Union. However, no agreement or formal proposal has been confirmed. Armenian media have asked the Foreign Ministry to clarify whether Yerevan has been approached by Rome or EU institutions.
According to reports, Italy is considering Armenia as a possible location for a migrant reception or repatriation centre. According to Corriere della Sera, Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni is seeking wider European support for a tougher common approach to irregular migration. Rome wants to expand the use of facilities modelled on Italy's arrangement with Albania, with similar centres potentially established outside the European Union and funded by the EU. The preliminary list of possible partner countries reportedly includes Rwanda, Ghana, Senegal, Tunisia, Libya, Mauritania, Egypt, Uganda and Ethiopia, as well as Uzbekistan, Montenegro and Armenia. Italy is also proposing closer links between EU trade benefits for developing countries and their cooperation on the readmission of migrants. The initiative forms part of Meloni's effort to turn Italy's migration policy into a broader European strategy, bringing together border management, economic cooperation and partnerships with third countries. Germany is reported to support the initiative, while France did not sign a joint letter backed by 22 states. Rome also remains critical of Spain's migration policy, which the Italian government considers too permissive. It remains unclear whether Armenia has received any official or informal proposal. The News Armenia agency has asked the Armenian Foreign Ministry to clarify whether Rome or EU institutions have approached Yerevan and what Armenia's position would be on hosting such facilities.
Azerbaijan's Foreign Minister Ceyhun Bayramov met Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky on Thursday during an official visit to Ukraine. Both parties discussed current and future strategic partnership between Azerbaijan and Ukraine, including political dialogue, energy, transport and humanitarian cooperation. Also on the agenda were discussions on regional security and the situation in Ukraine, with Azerbaijan reiterating its support for Kiev's sovereignty and territorial integrity. President Zelensky thanked President Ilham Aliyev and the Azerbaijani government for their continued assistance to Ukraine. Georgia's foreign ministry says it's looking into delays affecting Azerbaijani trucks at the country's border crossings after receiving a diplomatic note from Azerbaijan's embassy. The ministry says the embassy's appeal has been passed to the relevant authorities, which are now taking action on the Georgian law. The response follows reports that a number of Azerbaijani lorry drivers carrying transit cargo have been stranded at Georgian customs checkpoints for days, and in some cases for more than a month. According to those reports, the drivers were not given an official explanation for the delays, and their documents were confiscated, prompting Azerbaijan's embassy to formally raise the issue with Georgian authorities. The first submarine fiber optic cable across the Caspian Sea has been successfully installed as part of Azerbaijan's Digital Silkway initiative. The 380-kilometer cable connects Sumgait in Azerbaijan with Aktau in Kazakhstan, creating a new digital link between Europe and Asia. Implemented by Azer Telecom and Kazakh Telecom, the project is expected to boost data exchange capacity and strengthen regional connectivity. The cable is scheduled to become fully operational by the end of 2026. That's your latest news update. Thank you for your time and for watching Daybreak with me, Bakhtiar Sanova, and stay tuned for more updates.